So we've just navigated the complex landscape of epigenetics, how our environment can tweak gene expression. But let's zoom back out to the genes themselves, and honestly, when we look at their direct impact on behavior, it's often surprisingly small. Think of it like trying to predict someone's personality based on a single letter in their DNA. It's just not that simple. So, if single genes are weak predictors, what about when they interact with the environment? This is where things get really interesting, especially with genes related to stress hormones, the glucocorticoids. We've got two main players here, the MR receptor and the GR receptor. Imagine a gene variant for the MR receptor that makes someone particularly sensitive to childhood abuse. That combination doesn't just lead to being stressed. It actually wires the brain's threat detector, the amygdala, to be hyperactive. It's like the alarm system is permanently stuck on red. Then there's FKB5, a protein that fine-tunes the GR receptor. One version of this protein, again, only matters if you've experienced childhood abuse. It's linked to aggression, hostility, PTSD, and guess what? Yep, another hyperactive amygdala. The key takeaway here isn't just that genes matter, but that they only really matter when combined with specific environmental experiences like trauma. It's a partnership, not a solo act. Okay, so one gene plus environment is bad enough, but what happens when you mix two risky genes? Researchers looked at the 5-HTT gene involved in serotonin and DRD4 involved in dopamine. Having one risky variant of each doesn't just add up, it creates a synergistic effect, massively increasing the risk of disruptive behavior in kids. And get this, if the kid also comes from a low socioeconomic status background, that risk gets even higher. It's like stacking risk factors. But here's the frustrating part. Despite all this painstaking work, the results are still messy. Study A finds something, Study B replicates it partially, Study C finds nothing. And the effect size is still tiny. Knowing someone has these specific gene variants tells you almost nothing about their actual behavior. Why? Because after wrestling with just two genes, we realize there are still nearly 20,000 other human genes and countless environmental factors waiting in the wings. Clearly, we need a broader strategy. This brings us to a classic problem with the candidate gene approach. It's like searching for your lost car keys only under the streetlight. You know, the joke goes, I dropped my ring, I'm looking for it. Where did you drop it? Over by those trees. Then why are you searching here? Because this is where the light is. That's exactly what we do with candidate genes. We focus on genes we already suspect might be relevant, maybe because they code for neurotransmitters we think are important for behavior. But with 20,000 plus human genes, it's statistically probable that plenty of interesting relevant genes are hiding in the dark, unknown to us. So while studying known candidates gives us clues, it's inherently limited. We're likely missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. We need a way to cast a wider net. So, how do we ditch the streetlight and start exploring the whole neighborhood? Enter Genome-Wide Association Studies, or GWAS. The idea is revolutionary in its scope. Instead of picking favorite genes, let's scan the entire genome. We look at millions of tiny variations called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Think of them as single-letter typos in the DNA code, places where people commonly differ. Most of these differences don't change the protein produced, thanks to the redundancy of the genetic code, but they're markers. The process involves collecting DNA from tens, hundreds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. Then, you compare the frequency of specific SNPs between groups, say, people with a certain trait versus those without. If a particular SNP pops up more often in one group, bingo, you've found a potential association. It doesn't mean the SNP causes the trait, but it suggests the nearby gene might be involved. GWAS gives us a massive list of potential suspects. Another way to cast a wide net related but distinct from GWAS is using microarrays or gene chips. Instead of looking at the DNA sequence itself, this approach looks at which genes are turned on or off, meaning which ones are actively being used to make proteins right now. You take a tissue sample, like a muscle biopsy, from someone with and without a degenerative muscle disease. Then you measure the activity level of all roughly 20,000 genes simultaneously. Are there genes firing constantly in diseased muscle, but not in healthy muscle? Or vice versa? By finding these differences in gene expression, you identify new candidate genes that might be directly involved in the condition. It's like listening to the cell's conversation to figure out what's going wrong. Now, let's see what these fishing expeditions actually catch. Take height, a seemingly straightforward trait. A landmark GWAS study crunched data from nearly 184,000 people. An army of scientists, 280 authors on the paper. What did they find? Hundreds of genetic variants associated with height. A few were already known players in bone growth, but most were completely new territory. But here's the kicker. The single strongest predictor accounted for only 0.4% of the variation in height. Combine all those hundreds of variants, and you still only explain about 10% of why one person is tall and another is short. It's like saying knowing someone's favorite color helps predict their height, slightly better than chance, but not very useful. The same story unfolds for BMI, body mass index. Another huge study, similar scale, similar outcome. The most powerful single variant explains a 0.3% of BMI variation. These traits are incredibly polygenic, meaning they're governed by a vast number of genes, each contributing a minuscule amount. What about something a bit more complex, like educational attainment, how many years of school someone completes? A massive 2013 GWAS tackled this. Over 126,000 participants, around 180 authors again. The result? Dozens of genes implicated. The single most predictive variant explained a whopping 0.2% of the variation. Combine all the identified variants and you get about 2%. 2%. That's even less than height or BMI. The accompanying commentary was wonderfully understated. In short, educational attainment looks to be a very polygenic trait. Very polygenic. It's like trying to understand a symphony by analyzing the vibration of a single air molecule. The genetic architecture is incredibly complex. So, what about the really messy, nuanced behaviors we're often interested in? Things like impulsivity, aggression, or social anxiety. A handful of studies have bravely ventured into this territory. And guess what? The pattern holds. You end up with a long list of dozens of genes that show some statistical association with the behavior. You then have to prioritize which ones to investigate further, usually starting with the ones showing the strongest signals. It's incredibly hard work, still very much in its infancy. And remember, GWAS techniques might miss rare genetic variants, meaning the true number of involved genes is probably even higher. We're dealing with a genetic soup of immense complexity. Let's pause and summarize what we've learned from this deep dive into genetics. First, the sheer volume of research on specific genes is staggering, hundreds, even thousands of papers per gene. Second, the effect of any single gene on behavior is typically microscopic. In fact, the belief that you have a warrior gene might actually influence your behavior more than the gene itself does. Third, these behaviors aren't caused by one or two genes, they're shaped by hundreds, maybe thousands of genes, each contributing a tiny fraction. Fourth, this leads to nonspecificity. A gene linked to depression might also be linked to anxiety, OCD, bipolar disorder. It's part of overlapping networks relevant to many conditions. Finally, and crucially, we can't forget the constant interplay of genes with each other and with the environment. It's always gene, 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 environment. Now, amidst all these tiny effects and technical hurdles, it's tempting to throw the genetic baby out with the bathwater. Remember, the genes have nothing to do with behavior ice age mentioned in the text? That's an oversimplification. Genes absolutely do matter. They specify the very building blocks of our brains, the proteins, the neurotransmitters, the receptors. Given that many genes come in different versions, polymorphisms, they inevitably contribute to individual differences. However, their effects aren't deterministic. They're profoundly context-dependent. So instead of asking, what does this gene do? The smarter question is, what does this gene do in this specific environment, and when expressed within this particular network of other genes? Genes aren't about inevitability. They're about tendencies, potentials, vulnerabilities, all embedded within a complex web of other factors. Okay, let's shift gears completely. We've seen the microscopic world of genes. Now, let's look at the macroscopic world of culture and how it shapes us in ways that might surprise you. Before we dive into the main topic, let's consider a seemingly biological difference: math ability. For decades, there's been a consistent finding that males, on average, tend to score slightly higher on math tests, and the gap widens dramatically at the top end. Back in 1983, for every girl acing the math SAT, there were 11 boys. The obvious biological culprit: testosterone. It plays a role in brain development, and giving adults testosterone can boost some math skills. Seems simple, right? Biology dictates math prowess. But hold on, let's bring in culture. A fascinating 2008 study published in Science looked at math scores across 40 countries and correlated them with indices of gender equality: economic, educational, political. The results were striking. The more gender equal a country was, the smaller the gap in math scores between boys and girls. In Scandinavia, the gap basically vanished. And in Iceland, which was the most gender equal country at the time, girls actually scored higher than boys. What does this tell us? It strongly suggests that the observed difference in math ability isn't primarily biological but deeply influenced by cultural factors like gender equality. Culture travels with us, shaping our potential in ways we might not immediately recognize. The Afghan girl and the Swedish girl pictured aren't just different culturally. Their likelihood of excelling in math is demonstrably affected by their societal context. This isn't just about math scores. Culture leaves incredibly long-lasting residues. Think about it. The level of corruption in a diplomat's home country predicts whether they'll pay their parking tickets in New York City. That's cultural baggage traveling across continents and decades. Or consider that ancient Shiite-Sunni conflict, still simmering over a succession issue from 14 centuries ago. Or how population density back in 1500 AD significantly predicted authoritarianism in 2000 AD across 33 countries. Even seemingly mundane things like which tool early farmers adopt, the hoe versus the plow, over millennia can predict modern levels of gender equality. Culture isn't just fleeting trends, it's a deep, persistent force shaping our world and our behavior across vast stretches of time. So if culture is such a powerful, enduring force, then when we try to understand profound human actions, pulling a trigger, touching an arm, committing an act of violence or kindness, we absolutely cannot ignore it. Any biological explanation that leaves culture out is incomplete, potentially misleading. Therefore, our focus shifts to understanding how culture shapes our best and worst behaviors. We'll explore systematic patterns in cultural variation, how culture and biology co-evolve, different brains creating different cultures and different cultures shaping different brains. And crucially, we'll look at how the environment, the ecology, lays the groundwork for these cultural differences. Before we go further, let's quickly define what we mean by culture. The classic definition from Edward Tyler emphasizes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, all things acquired as a member of society. It's inherently human-centric. But then Jane Goodall dropped a bombshell in the 1960s. Chimps make tools. They strip twigs to fish for termites. Since then, tool use has been documented in countless species: apes, monkeys, elephants, sea otters, birds, dolphins, even octopuses. It's undeniable evidence of non-human culture. However, anthropologists often draw a line here, emphasizing aspects like ideas, symbols, or moral systems as uniquely human. For our purposes, let's stick with a broad, intuitive definition popularized by Frans de Waal. Culture is how we do and think about things, transmitted by non-genetic means. This allows us to see both the shared and unique aspects of human culture. Now, defining culture precisely is a hot debate among anthropologists. Some argue the classical definition is too broad, trying to exclude animals. Others emphasize uniquely human elements like abstract thought, morality, or language. It's a complex philosophical discussion. To keep things moving, we'll adopt de Waal's practical definition: how we do and think about things, transmitted by non-genetic means. This covers everything from language and rituals to social norms and even fashion. With this working definition, let's ask, when we look across the incredible diversity of human cultures, are the similarities or the differences the most striking feature? Well, there are certainly similarities. Humans independently invented agriculture, writing, pottery, astronomy, coinage. It's remarkable convergence. Scholars like Donald Brown have compiled lists of human universals, traits found in every known human society. His list is extensive. Concern with aesthetics, magic distinctions between male and female natures, baby talk, belief in gods, altered states of consciousness, marriage, body adornment, prohibitions against murder, kinship terms, numbers, cooking, private sex, names, dance, play, concepts of right and wrong, empathy, reciprocity, rituals, fairness, myths about the afterlife, music, color terms, gossip, language, humor, lying, symbolism, tools, trade, toilet training. The list goes on. These shared elements form the common ground of humanity. But if you look closely, the differences are arguably even more staggering. They shape fundamental aspects of life. Life expectancy varies dramatically from Monaco to Angola. Literacy rates differ vastly between Latvia and Niger. Infant mortality rates tell a horrific story of inequality. Wealth per capita differs by orders of magnitude. Safety is wildly different. The risk of being murdered in Honduras is 450 times higher than in Singapore. Experiences of violence, gender roles, even happiness levels vary enormously. Look at gender equality. Scandinavian parliaments are almost half women, while others have zero. Even seemingly universal things like prosocial behavior have different triggers, helping someone because they helped you before, USA, because they're higher ranking, China, or because they're a friend, Spain. Your entire life experience hinges on which cultural landscape you inhabit. Amidst this vast variability, researchers often look for patterns. One prominent contrast is between collectivist and individualist cultures. Think East Asian cultures versus the United States as the prototypical example. Collectivist cultures emphasize harmony, interdependence, conformity, and the group's needs. Individualist cultures emphasize autonomy, personal achievement, uniqueness, and individual rights and needs. The classic American concept of looking out for number one captures individualism. While the reluctance of students in some collectivist cultures to volunteer answers in class illustrates collectivism. These differences manifest in how people define themselves. I'm a contractor versus I'm a parent, attribute success. I'm good at it versus I was lucky. Remember the past, events versus relationships, find motivation, self versus group, compete, get ahead versus don't fall behind, and even draw social networks, putting oneself in the center versus periphery. And these cultural differences aren't just superficial, they have measurable biological correlates. Neuroimaging studies show that when Americans look at pictures of themselves versus friends, their medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, a key area for self-representation, lights up much more strongly than when East Asians do the same task. There's also a fascinating difference in recalling stressful events. Americans are more likely to remember times they influenced others, while East Asians recall times they were influenced. Force either group to talk about the opposite, and both show stress responses, glucocorticoid release. Even our reward systems seem tuned differently. European Americans' dopamine systems activate when seeing excited faces, while Chinese participants show activation for calm faces. Culture seems to subtly rewire our brains. These cultural styles also shape our moral systems and cognitive approaches. In traditional collectivist societies, conformity is often synonymous with morality, enforced through shame rather than guilt. There's a greater tendency towards utilitarian thinking, sometimes prioritizing the group's outcome over individual rights. This leads to stronger in-group bias. Studies show Koreans, for example, report more empathy and show more brain activation when seeing in-group members in pain compared to Americans. Interestingly, both cultures denigrate outgroups, but only individualists inflate their own group's assessment to do so. Cognitive styles also differ, as shown by Richard Nisbet's work. Westerners tend to solve problems linearly, relying on language and categories monkey plus bear equals animal. East Asians often use holistic reasoning, focusing on relationships and context. Monkey plus banana equals food for monkey. They're better at relative judgments and processing the overall scene, not just the central object. Even eye movements differ. Westerners look at the center first, East Asians scan the whole picture. Now, before we generalize too broadly, let's note the caveats. These are averages. There are plenty of Westerners who are more collectivist than some East Asians, and vice versa. Cultures change over time, conformity is decreasing in some East Asian cultures. Brief exposure to cultural cues can temporarily shift processing styles. And descendants of East Asian immigrants in America become significantly more individualistic within just one generation. So, East Asian and Western are not monolithic blocks. But why these differences? Ecology plays a huge role. Consider East Asia, the key is rice. Domesticated around 10,000 years ago, rice cultivation requires immense communal effort. Planting, harvesting, irrigation, water management, it all demands cooperation on a massive scale. Transforming the landscape itself requires collective action. This deep reliance on cooperation, this history of working together for survival, likely laid the groundwork for the strong collectivist tendencies seen in the region today. The roots run deep, literally and figuratively. Does this ecological link hold up? Yes. There's a fascinating exception in northern China, where rice cultivation is difficult and wheat is grown instead. Wheat farming is more individualistic. And guess what? People in northern China, compared to rice-growing regions, look more like Westerners on standard collectivist individualist tests. They have higher rates of divorce and patent filings, markers of individualism. It seems the mode of production, shaped by the local ecology, strongly influences the resulting cultural style. The roots of individualism, like those of wheat, run deep in northern China. This connection between production mode and cognition isn't limited to East Asia. Consider a study in Turkey's Black Sea region. Three groups lived nearby: fishing communities, farmers, and mountain herders. They shared language, religion, and genes, but their modes of production differed. Herding is solitary, while farming and fishing require group work. The results? Herders thought less holistically than the farmers and fishermen. They were better at judging absolute lengths and categorizing objects, glove with scarf, while the others excelled at relative judgments and relational pairings, glove with hand. The authors concluded, social interdependence fosters holistic thinking. Again, the way people make a living shapes how they perceive and process the world. Now, here's where it gets really intriguing. Genetics enters the picture again. Recall the DRD4 gene, the dopamine receptor D4. It's incredibly variable, with at least 25 human variants, and some variants appear to have been selected for during human evolution. The most common is 4R. But there's also the 7R variant, linked to novelty-seeking, extroversion, and impulsivity. Interestingly, 7R became much more frequent around 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. Look at the distribution map. High frequencies of 7R are found in populations with histories of long-distance migration. Africans, Europeans, Middle Easterners moving into the Americas, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon basin. It's like the 7R variant, tagged along with the most adventurous humans. Conversely, look at East and Southeast Asia, near zero frequency of 7R. This suggests that as rice agriculture and collectivist societies developed in East Asia, there was strong selection against the 7R variant. Perhaps impulsive individuals weren't well suited for the highly cooperative, stable environment required for rice farming. It hints at a coevolution of cultural style and genetic frequencies. Let's switch focus again to another major ecological niche: dry, marginal environments unsuitable for farming, the deserts, steppes, and tundras. Here lives the world of nomadic pastoralists, the Bedouins, Tuareg, Maasai, Sami, Uruk, Tuvans, Aymara. They move with their herds of sheep, goats, cattle, llamas, camels, living off meat, milk, and blood, trading hides and wool. Anthropologists have long noted similarities in their cultures, born from this tough existence and often minimal state control. But there's a central vulnerability. Unlike crops or gathered plants, a herd is mobile and easily stolen. This constant threat of theft by rustlers or raiders shapes everything. This vulnerability breeds several cultural correlates. Militarism is rampant. Pastoralist societies often have warrior classes, fueled by the prestige of trophies, narratives of glorious death in battle, high rates of polygamy, and often harsh parenting. Worldwide, monotheism is relatively rare, but when it occurs, it's disproportionately found among desert pastoralists. Think about it. Deserts teach a world reduced to basics, fostering a singular, often fatalistic worldview reflected in religions like Islam or Judaism. In contrast, lush rainforests teem with life, seemingly lending themselves to polytheism. Pastoralism also fosters cultures of honor. These involve strict codes of hospitality and civility, especially for travelers, but crucially, they mandate retribution for insults or threats to self, family, or clan. Failure to respond risks losing reputation and invites future attacks. If they steal your camel today, you must act tomorrow. While pastoralist cultures of honor exist globally, the most famous westernized example is the American South. Think hospitality, chivalry, emphasis on legacy and family name continuity. Honor extends to place, as seen in the Hatfield-McCoy feud spanning generations, or Robert E. Lee choosing loyalty to his home state Virginia over the Union, despite personal reservations about slavery. Defensive honor was paramount, often seen as self-reliance in the absence of a reliable legal system. Andrew Jackson was told never to seek justice from the law, but to take matters into his own hands. Violence, particularly dueling, was common, not necessarily about wanting to kill, but proving willingness to die for one's honor. This led to persistently high rates of violence in the South, but of a specific type, disproportionately rural, among acquaintances, triggered by perceived slights to honor, and often met with lenient juries. How real is this physiological response to insult? Nisbet and Cohen conducted one of the coolest psychology experiments ever. Male undergrads were provoked in a narrow hallway. A Confederate jostled them and called them an asshole. Blood samples were taken before and after. The results were dramatic. Southern subjects showed massive increases in both testosterone and glucocorticoids, stress hormones, after the insult, compared to Northern subjects who barely flinched physiologically. It's like the Southern culture of honor had primed their bodies for a fight-or-flight response to social provocation. Even imagining scenarios involving jealousy led Southerners to envision more violent outcomes. Culture wasn't just affecting thoughts and actions, it was directly influencing their biological stress response systems. So, wrapping up this whirlwind tour, we've seen that genetic influences on behavior are incredibly subtle, spread across thousands of genes, and only meaningful within a specific context. On the other hand, culture exerts a powerful, pervasive influence, shaped by deep historical and ecological roots, affecting not just our thoughts and actions but even our biology and perception. Understanding the full picture of human behavior requires weaving together these threads: genetics, environment, culture, and their intricate dance. It's a complex tapestry, but hopefully, this gives you a richer appreciation for the patterns within it.